Millions watched it unfold live. Trump leaned forward and said, "Sit down, boy." But what came next? Obama's calm, razor-edged reply changed the entire atmosphere and silenced even his harshest critics. The cameras were already rolling when it happened. A moment that didn't just take over the room, it froze it in time. The event at the Phoenix Convention Center had been billed as a bipartisan conversation on race and leadership, a rare gathering of a sitting and a former U.S. president meant to discuss America's future. But in one breath, the purpose of the forum was overshadowed. Trump squinted at Obama, his voice sharp as he dropped the words that echoed across the packed hall. "Sit down, boy." The reaction was immediate. Gasps swept through the audience like a wave. You could hear the shock in people's voices, the air sucked right out of the room. For a moment, thousands sat frozen in disbelief. In the front row, a pastor from Detroit lowered his head, lips pressed tightly together. A few rows back, a college student in a navy hoodie whispered, "Did he really just say that?" as he raised his phone to record. Every major network, from CNN to Fox, already had their cameras locked on the stage, but none of them could have predicted what was coming next. Trump leaned back in his chair, almost smug. The room held its breath, and then Obama spoke, calm, cutting, unforgettable. Trump's supporters in the audience let out uneasy chuckles. Some clapped half-heartedly, others smirked, while a few simply avoided eye contact altogether. On the opposite side of the hall, though, the reaction was entirely different. People were visibly trembling with anger. A woman in her late 60s clutched at her necklace, as if steadying her heartbeat. The room split itself in two, one side frozen between laughter and hesitation, the other seething with disbelief. And then there was Obama. He didn't rise from his chair. He didn't slam a fist on the table. He didn't even let his expression shift. Instead, he leaned back ever so slightly, rested one hand on his knee, and used the other to smooth out his jacket. That subtle, deliberate motion spoke louder than any raised voice could. It told everyone watching he was calm, he was in charge, and he wouldn't be baited. For a few long moments, Obama remained silent. And with every second, that silence grew heavier, pressing down on the hall. Whispered voices filled the air. Is he going to answer? Did he hear it? What's he waiting for? Up in the press box, reporters stumbled over their keyboards, trying to write tweets about an exchange that hadn't even finished yet. The moderator, Professor Harold Stokes of Arizona State, shifted nervously in his seat, his gaze flicking between the two men as if watching an unavoidable collision unfold in slow motion. The cameras zoomed in closer. Every crease on Trump's face was visible, every flicker of tension impossible to miss. The nation was holding its breath. You could see it in Obama's eyes, the quiet calculation, the steady control. The air inside the hall felt heavy, charged like the pause before a storm. "Did you hear that?" whispered a woman seated beside a city councilman from Mesa. "By tomorrow, this will be everywhere." The councilman said nothing, his gaze locked firmly on the stage, his silence more telling than words. Trump, realizing the stillness was not bending in his favor, leaned toward the mic again. "What? Did I say something wrong?" His voice carried a smirk, sharp and taunting, almost begging for reaction. But Obama didn't move. He pressed his lips together in the faintest half-smile, tilted his head ever so slightly, and locked eyes with Trump. No words, no flinch, just a stare that spoke louder than shouting ever could. The audience shifted, restless murmurs rippling across the hall. It was the kind of silence that told people something inevitable was coming. The calm before the explosion. Even a Fox News analyst, seated near the press row, leaned toward his colleague and whispered, "If he opens his mouth now, this entire narrative flips." Every set of eyes was glued to Obama. The weight of expectation pressed harder with each passing second. Trump's fingers tapped impatiently against the desk, but even he couldn't break free from the stare that held him, and the room itself, captive. What followed wasn't an outburst. It wasn't retaliation. It wasn't fury. It was something else entirely. Calmer, sharper, and far more powerful. Even before Obama spoke, The silence itself had already begun to write the story that America would remember. For nearly 10 seconds, the Phoenix Convention Center hung in suspense. It was the kind of silence that makes your throat tighten and your hands restless. The audience leaned forward almost unconsciously, drawn in as though the space between the stage and the seats had thickened, heavy with expectation. No one dared to blink. Obama didn't hurry. He reached for the glass of water by his side, lifted it smoothly, and took a slow sip. The microphone caught the faint clink of ice in the glass, a sound amplified by the stillness. When he placed it back down, every movement was measured, deliberate, almost ritualistic. That composure unsettled Trump more than any shouted retort ever could. He shifted in his chair, his fingers drumming harder on the desk, eyes darting toward the audience, as if to remind them he was still the one at the helm. In the front row, someone whispered, "Why isn't he saying anything?" Their voice trembled with both nerves and anticipation. A woman next to them leaned closer, replying softly, "Because right now, silence is louder than words." And it was true. You could feel it. With every second that Obama stayed quiet, the grip of the moment slipped further away from Trump. Up in the press gallery, reporters froze, their hands hovering above keyboards, waiting for that first word that they knew would decide the headline. Cameramen edged closer to their lenses, trying to capture every flicker of expression. In the audience, a boy no older than 12 tugged at his father's sleeve and whispered, "Why did he call him boy?" The father, eyes never leaving the stage, replied quietly, "You'll understand when you're older." Trump, restless now, leaned forward again. His voice carried irritation, sharp and brittle. "Nothing? No response? I thought you always had something to say." He let out a laugh, short, jagged, but instead of commanding the room, it broke awkwardly, scattering in the air and falling flat. Then finally Obama moved. He shifted in his chair, placed both hands on the table, and leaned toward the microphone. His gaze met Trump's, not burning with anger, but with a steady patience that cut far deeper. "I'll respond," he said softly. The words were plain, almost understated, yet the crowd reacted as if a fuse had been lit. Phone shot higher. Reporters' fingers flew back to their keyboards. The silence cracked, but only slightly, because every ear strained to catch what would come next. And still, Obama didn't rush. He leaned back again, giving the hall time to breathe, letting Trump stew in the pause. That restraint itself was a statement. He would not be dragged into Trump's tempo. In the third row, a group of high schoolers leaned forward, eyes wide. One whispered, "He's about to destroy him." Another nodded, too captivated to blink. On stage, moderator Professor Stokes instinctively tried to intervene, "Gentlemen, if we can," but the words died in his throat. He, too, knew better than to interrupt what was about to happen. He knew this wasn't his moment to seize. The nation wasn't watching him anymore. They were watching history unfold, raw and unscripted. His role was no longer to guide the stage, but to let it breathe. Obama glanced once at the moderator, then turned back toward Trump. He adjusted his tie, not with nerves, but like a man taking control on his own terms. Every deliberate movement stretched the moment thinner, commanding attention without a single word. "You know," Obama finally began, his voice calm but resonant, "I've been called a lot of things in my life." He paused, letting the weight of the words hang heavy. "But respect," he continued, his eyes sweeping the hall, "that's never been something I had to beg for." The hall erupted. Applause thundered through the convention center, shaking the walls. People leapt to their feet, clapping until their hands ached. A black pastor in the front row threw his hand in the air and shouted, "Amen." Trump smirked, rolling his eyes, muttering under his breath. The cameras caught it. "Give me a break." But Obama didn't give the noise long to spin out. He lifted a hand, just slightly, and the cheers softened into silence again. It wasn't just quiet. It was obedience, reverence, the kind of control that no title could enforce. He turned from Trump and looked directly at the audience, his voice steady. Leadership isn't about the volume of your voice. It's about the strength of your example. You can call me whatever you like. But the truth is, when you disrespect me, You don't diminish me. You diminish the office you're sitting in." The words hit like a hammer wrapped in velvet. Trump leaned back, arms crossed, irritation etched across his face. But the power had already shifted. The audience knew it. The cameras knew it. The country watching at home knew it. The stage belonged to Obama now. Obama leaned toward the microphone, and the hall fell quiet once more. But this time, the silence wasn't born of shock. It was anticipation, thick, electric, as though every heartbeat in the room had synchronized, waiting for him to speak. His voice came steady, gentle even, but carrying the kind of weight that doesn't need to be loud to land heavy. "Respect isn't something you're handed like a medal," he began. "It isn't tied to the title you carry or how loudly you shout. Respect is earned by the way you treat others, by the example you set when no one is watching, and most of all, by the way you listen." The hall erupted in applause, rolling like a wave through the audience. Trump shifted in his seat, jaw tightening, as though he wanted to jump in, but the noise swallowed him whole. Obama didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He leaned back slightly, letting the applause crest and settle before continuing in that same calm, deliberate tone. "Mr. President," he said, turning to Trump, his gaze unflinching. "I've been called a lot of things in my life, by those who didn't know me and by those who refused to. But here's what I learned a long time ago. When someone falls back on insults, it reveals more about their fear than it does about your value." A sharp murmur cut through the audience, heads nodding, whispers flying. Up in the balcony, a man leaned over the railing and muttered, "He's cutting him to pieces without even raising his voice." Trump huffed, snatched up his mic, and snapped back, his words sharp but trembling at the edges. "Don't lecture me about respect, Barack. I'm the President of the United States." But the declaration sounded less like power and more like a plea to hold onto a room that had already slipped from his grasp. Obama didn't so much as blink. He let Trump's words settle into the air before answering in a calm, measured tone. "Yes, you are the president, and that's exactly why every word you speak carries weight. The office doesn't make you bigger than the people you serve. It should remind you that your responsibility is to carry yourself in a way that earns their trust." The line hit like an explosion. The hall erupted, applause, whistles, even the sound of feet stomping against the floor. The moderator lifted his hands in a half-hearted attempt to quiet the crowd, but the faint smile tugging at his lips betrayed him. Obama leaned toward the mic again. "You can order someone to sit down. You can try to shrink them with insults. But respect doesn't answer to commands. Respect comes when you stand for something greater than yourself." In the second row, a woman in a bright red blazer jumped to her feet and shouted, "Say it again." The crowd roared louder in agreement. Obama smiled faintly, then continued, "We tell our children that the measure of a man or a woman isn't in how much power they seize, but in how they use the power they've been entrusted with. We teach them to be fair, to be honest, to lift people up, not tear them down. Those lessons aren't complicated. They're simple. But when you're chosen to lead a nation, those simple lessons mean everything." Trump leaned forward, cutting in with a scoff. "Oh, please. You think speeches make you great? People didn't elect me to preach. They elected me to fight." Obama turned, his eyes locking on Trump. Calm, unshaken, piercing. "You're right. They didn't elect you to preach. But they did elect you to lead." The room fell still again, not with silence, but with the weight of a truth too heavy to escape. Obama leaned into the mic, his voice steady. "Fighting for yourself isn't leadership. Fighting for people who don't look like you, who don't pray like you, who don't even agree with you, that's leadership." The hall erupted. Even some Republicans clapped, swept up by the force of his words. Cameras caught a young Latina student wiping tears, an older veteran clapping slowly, eyes fixed on the stage. But Obama wasn't finished. He leaned closer, almost whispering, "Mr. President, the most powerful thing a leader can say isn't sit down. It's stand up with me. That's the difference." The ovation shook the walls. People stood, cheering, chanting his words back at him. "Stand up with me. Stand up with me." Trump threw up his hands, muttering, "Oh, give me a break," but his voice was drowned in the roar. The Phoenix Convention Center wasn't just a forum anymore. It had become a battlefield of words, and Obama on the field. A journalist from the Arizona Republic whispered, "This isn't a forum anymore. This will shape headlines for weeks." Down front, Reverend Harold Gaines from Detroit pressed a hand to his chest, eyes wet. "That's dignity they can't strip from us. That's history speaking." 2 rows back, a Republican governor leaned forward, whispering to his aide, "He's making sense, and that scares me." The aide scribbled furiously, already calculating how to spin the next press conference. On stage, the divide was visible. Trump leaned back, arms crossed, fingers tapping the mic in irritation. Beside him, Obama sat composed, hands folded, his gaze sweeping the hall like a teacher ensuring the lesson had landed. The moderator tried again, his voice cracking. "Ladies and gentlemen, please, let's keep this civil." But the crowd wasn't calming. From the middle rows, a college student stood and shouted, "Respect isn't about power." The hall roared in agreement. "It's about character," shouted a student, drawing cheers. From the other side, a Trump supporter fired back, "We don't need lectures, we need fighters." The clash of voices summed up the divide of America, captured live on national TV. Fox zoomed in on a young black girl clutching her mother's hand, eyes wide. CNN locked its lens on Obama's calm expression, a sharp contrast to Trump's growing frustration. 2 networks, 2 different Americas. Trump snapped into his mic. "This isn't a pep rally for Obama. I'm the president here, not him." But instead of applause, boos echoed from the crowd. Obama didn't answer. He just turned his head slowly, giving Trump that same steady look. The crowd erupted, reading his silence as strength. The room crackled with tension, like a stadium split between rival teams. But it wasn't about one man anymore. It was about 2 visions of leadership, force versus dignity. And the cameras captured it all. The cheers, the boos, the tears. It wasn't just a debate anymore. It was America watching itself in the mirror, divided, raw, impossible to ignore. But the real explosion wasn't inside the hall. It was outside, where cameras lit up the Phoenix night and reporters swarmed like hawks. Satellite trucks lined the streets. Microphones shoved in every direction as the first reaction spilled out. On CNN, Jake Tapper's voice was steady. This wasn't politics. This was an earthquake. Across the street, Fox's Laura Ingraham insisted, "The president was just being direct. The left is twisting it." MSNBC countered with Rachel Maddow, shaking her head. "You can't brush off the word 'sit down, boy.'" Obama's calm, deliberate response only highlighted the contrast. Meanwhile, Twitter HQ was in chaos. The hashtag #SitDownBoy had already shot to the top of U.S. trends, racing toward number 1 worldwide. Right under #SitDownBoy, another tag was climbing fast. #StandUpWithMe, Obama's exact words. The clips were everywhere. A shaky phone video from the balcony, the crowd's gasp crystal clear, hit 3 million views on TikTok within an hour. CNN's cut of Obama leaning into the mic racked up hundreds of thousands of retweets in minutes. Then came the memes. Trump's scowl with captions like, "When the teacher calls you out in front of the class." Obama's calm stare paired with "Real leaders don't shout, they guide." Newsrooms scrambled. Local stations broke into weather updates. Boston anchors opened broadcasts with the Arizona clash. By nightfall, late-night comedy had its teeth in it too. Jimmy Kimmel rolled the clip, his audience laughing and clapping before he quipped, "That's the calmest roast I've seen since my mom told me I was an accident." Stephen Colbert called it a masterclass in leadership, not a comeback. Not every reaction was a meme. On Facebook, pastors and teachers posted long reflections. Reverend Lisa Harmon of Indianapolis wrote, "Real leadership is restraint, not humiliation. That's the example our children need." Her words were shared tens of thousands of times overnight. Conservative outlets fired back. Breitbart's front page blared, "Obama plays the victim. Media applauds." On Fox, Sean Hannity told viewers, "The left wants to crown Obama a saint. Trump is a fighter, and fighters don't sugarcoat. But the clip was everywhere. Flip channels, scroll Instagram, check Twitter. It was the same moment on loop. Trump snapping "sit down, boy." Obama straightening his jacket, delivering a calm reply that cut deeper than anger ever could. By 1 a.m., Twitter's trending bar looked like a war zone. Hashtag respect is earned. Hashtag stand up with me. Hashtag presidential forum. Analysts estimated 50 million views in just a few hours. By sunrise, the headlines were set. The Washington Post, respect versus power. Obama silences Trump with words. The Wall Street Journal framed it as forum sparks political firestorm. The LA Times dropped subtlety altogether, printing the headline in quotes, "Sit down, boy." The clash had escaped Phoenix. It was now spilling into living rooms, group chats, and nightly debates across the country. But while America argued, the real fallout was happening behind closed doors. In the White House residence, the atmosphere was combustible. Trump paced the Lincoln sitting room, tie loosened, cheeks burning. Fox News played in the background, Laura Ingraham doing her best to defend him, though even she sounded uneasy. Trump stabbed a finger at the TV. They're twisting it, twisting everything. Fake news, blowing it up. I just told him to sit down. Jason Wilkes, a senior aide, shifted in his chair. "Mr. President, with respect, the clip's everywhere. Social media won't let it die. Even our allies are struggling to spin this." Trump wheeled on him. "Struggling? That's your job. Fix it. Call Hannity. Call Tucker. I want every outlet reminding people Obama was the worst president in history." Trump's voice rose in the Lincoln sitting room, his palms smacking against the arm of a chair. The economy, the jobs, the disasters, remind them. They can't give him the win on this. His aides nodded nervously, already calculating how to spin the unspinnable. Meanwhile, in a quiet hotel suite in downtown Chicago, Obama sat with a small circle of friends and longtime advisors. The TV was muted, but the captions replayed his words in an endless loop. Valerie Jarrett leaned forward. "Barack, that wasn't just a comeback. You showed the contrast without ever raising your voice." Obama exhaled, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "I wasn't there to spar. I wanted to talk about leadership, where we're going as a country. But if you wanted to make it about respect, fine. Maybe that's what people needed to hear." David Plouffe glanced up from his phone. The reaction's massive. Global trends. Kids repeating your line like a mantra. "Stand up with me." "I haven't seen energy like this since Yes We Can." Obama gave a quiet laugh, shaking his head. "I'm not running for anything. But if the message sticks, if dignity and respect stay in the conversation, maybe the firestorm is worth it." Michelle, silent until now, finally spoke. Her voice was steady, certain. "It wasn't just what you said. It was how you said it. Kids are watching. Families are watching. Tonight, you showed them composure is power." Back in Washington, the phones at the White House buzzed nonstop. Republican senators called in, their voices split between public loyalty and private alarm. One of them, Senator Alan Briggs of Ohio, didn't mince words. "Mr. President, that phrase won't play well in the suburbs. You need to walk it back before it sticks." Trump waved it off with a snort. "Walk it back? Never. That's weakness. People elected me because I don't apologize. I double down." He grabbed a pen, scrawling on a notepad. "Draft me a tweet. We don't play defense. We hit harder." 2 states away in Obama's Chicago suite, the tone was entirely different. Valerie Jarrett read aloud from her phone, her voice soft but steady. "Pastor Williams in Baltimore says he's using your words in Sunday's sermon." A teacher in Dallas played the clip for her students. "Even a few conservative voices are admitting you handled it with class." Obama leaned back, thoughtful. "This isn't about me. It's about the kind of behavior we normalize. If a president can say something like that and face no consequence, what message does it send? Not just to adults, but to kids who will grow up thinking that's how leaders act." Michelle spoke up, her voice firm. "That's why tonight mattered. Not because of politics, but because it drew a line. Respect isn't optional. It's essential." By 2 a.m., the split screen was complete. In Chicago, reflection. In Washington, retaliation. Trump's Twitter feed lit up with blasts. "Fake news twisting my words. Obama's weak reply won't erase the disasters he left behind. Within minutes, Trump's late-night tweet storm was echoing through his base, retweeted thousands of times by loyalists who repeated his defense. But for every supporter shouting fake news, there were 10 voices replaying Obama's calm reply, pairing it with captions like, "This is what leadership looks like." Behind closed doors, the contrast was unmistakable. Trump's team scrambled, aggressive but frantic, trying to seize control of a narrative already slipping away. Obama's circle didn't need to chase it. The story was chasing them. But the real verdict wouldn't come from pundits or party operatives. It would come from ordinary Americans, waking up to headlines and deciding which vision of leadership they believed in. By sunrise, the confrontation had spilled out of Phoenix and Washington into kitchens, bus stops, coffee shops, factory floors, and classrooms across the country. In a diner off I-71 outside Columbus, Ohio, the clip played on a loop above the counter. Truckers and factory workers hunched over steaming mugs, their eyes fixed on the screen. One man in a camo jacket shook his head. That was cold. He didn't even have to raise his voice. A waitress polishing the counter added, "My kids saw it before school. They said Obama looked like a teacher scolding the class." And they're right. He didn't need to yell. In Dallas, a high school teacher wheeled in a TV and pressed play for her first period civics class. Students leaned forward in their chairs, watching the exchange in silence. When it ended, a hand shot up in the back row. "Why does one sound like a parent?" the student asked, and the other like a kid in trouble. Her students watched silently as Obama's calm response filled the screen. When the video ended, a quiet boy in the back raised his hand. "Why did he call him boy? My grandpa used to say that word was never just about being young." The teacher took a slow breath. That's exactly the conversation we need to have. Words matter. Leaders' words matter most of all. In Detroit, Reverend Harold Gaines, who had sat in the Phoenix Forum himself, preached from his pulpit that Sunday. His congregation leaned forward as he quoted Obama's line, "Respect doesn't bow to commands." The crowd clapped, then rose to its feet as Gaines thundered, "Dignity is not granted by office. It is shown by character." A church volunteer uploaded the sermon to Facebook. By nightfall, it had 2 million views. In rural Montana, outside a hardware store, a local news crew caught up with a retired farmer named Clyde. Wearing a faded John Deere cap, he squinted at the camera. "I didn't vote for Obama. Never did. But I'll say this, he carried himself better than I've seen in a long time." The other guy looked rattled. His words struck a nerve online, especially with independents tired of partisan shouting matches. On college campuses, the energy was electric. At the University of Michigan, students rallied on the quad, holding cardboard signs that read, "Stand up with me." Their chant echoed across TikTok, clips replayed by millions, many too young to have voted during Obama's presidency. "This isn't about politics," one student shouted into a bullhorn. "It's about how leaders treat people. That's the standard we should all demand." But not every reaction favored Obama. In Alabama, a conservative radio host railed against what he called the coronation of St. Barack. His callers phoned in one after another, some furious, others relieved to hear someone push back. "The media's trying to crown him while crucifying Trump," one caller said. "We're not buying it." The clash didn't end on stage. It followed Americans into diners, classrooms, churches, and factory floors. In Gary, Indiana, steelworkers argued over lunch. "If my boss talked to me like that, I'd quit." Another shot back. "That's Trump, he fights." The break room buzzed with laughter and frustration. In Detroit, Reverend Harold Gaines told his congregation, "Dignity is not granted by office, it is shown by character." His sermon went viral, viewed millions of times. In rural Montana, a retired farmer admitted, "I never voted for Obama, but he carried himself better." The other guy looked rattled. Social media lit up. A single mother in Albuquerque tweeted about explaining the word boy to her 12-year-old daughter. In Miami, an elderly Cuban American told Univision, "Obama showed calm, dignity. That's what I want for my grandchildren." Not every reaction was praise. In Alabama, a conservative radio host blasted the coronation of St. Barack. Callers rang in angry and defensive. But every one of them had seen the clip. By Monday morning, a Reuters Snap poll showed 62% of Americans, including more than a third of Republicans, believed Obama had carried himself with greater dignity than Trump. The verdict from ordinary people was already shaping the battle in Washington, where lawmakers were bracing for the fallout. By Monday morning, Washington was in overdrive. News tickers screamed forum fallout and respect versus power. Reporters swarmed lawmakers, demanding reactions. Senator Caroline Haskins of Vermont didn't hold back. That comment was unacceptable. Leadership lifts people up, it doesn't tear them down. Her clip went viral, praised for its calm precision. Across the aisle, Senator Rick Dworth of Florida tried to defend Trump. He speaks directly. The media is inflating this. But even as he said it, his eyes betrayed doubt. In the House, younger voices set the tone. Representative Aaliyah Brooks of Minnesota tweeted, "Respect is not optional." Every child learned more from Obama's restraint than from Trump's outburst. The post hit 1 million likes within a day. The battle lines were drawn, not just between parties, but between visions of leadership itself. Republicans in vulnerable districts scrambled for cover. Congressman Paul McKenna of Pennsylvania issued a cautious statement. "I don't agree with the phrasing used, but I support the president's leadership." Local papers blasted it as spineless. Behind closed doors, GOP strategists panicked. A leaked RNC memo warned candidates, "Do not repeat or defend the president's exact words. Pivot to the economy or Biden criticism." The leak itself became a scandal. Democrats seized the moment. Speaker Linda Navarro, flanked by civil rights leaders, declared, "This is bigger than politics." Obama showed grace. Trump showed disrespect. The contrast could not be clearer. Cable news turned the clash into a national drama. CNN replayed Obama's line, "The title doesn't make you bigger than the people you serve," calling it the quote of the decade. Fox countered with defenses of Trump's authority. MSNBC brought on historians who compared Obama's composure to Lincoln and Kennedy. But the real tremor came when Senator Jonathan Keene of Arizona, a longtime Trump ally, admitted, "Words matter." We all know the history of that word. It should not have been used. For the first time, cracks appeared in Trump's wall of loyalty. Senator Keene's mild rebuke sent shockwaves through the conservative base. Advocacy groups mobilized instantly. The NAACP praised Obama's restraint and demanded Trump apologize. Civil rights lawyers filled morning shows, explaining why Boy carried a painful legacy in America. Even evangelical leaders split. Some defended Trump's bluntness. Others, like Reverend Thomas Ellery of Tennessee, warned his congregation, "Leadership without respect is not leadership at all." Inside the White House, panic set in. Press Secretary Dana Hollis snapped at reporters. "The president uses plain language. It wasn't meant the way some are spinning it." The briefing collapsed into chaos. Meanwhile, Obama said nothing. No statements. No tweets. His silence became its own headline. As NBC's Chuck Todd put it, "The more Obama says nothing, the louder that moment on stage becomes." By Tuesday, the ripple was everywhere. Late-night hosts joked. Committees cited the clash in hearings. On the House floor, a congresswoman rose and quoted Obama's line verbatim. His words were no longer just a response. They were becoming a standard. The ripple wasn't just cultural, it was legislative, spiritual, personal. Washington obsessed over spin, but the impact seeped far deeper. By midweek, Obama's words had slipped into the bloodstream of the country itself, echoing in schools, churches, barbershops, and living rooms where politics rarely reached. At Jefferson High in Phoenix, a social studies teacher projected the clip onto a whiteboard. Her students sat in rapt silence. When Obama said, "Respect isn't demanded by a title. It's earned through conduct," one boy quietly copied the line into his notebook. The teacher paused and told the class, "That right there is why words matter. That's leadership without shouting, without insults, just truth." In Birmingham, Reverend Miriam Tate lifted her Bible in one hand, her phone in the other. On screen, Obama's calm face filled the sanctuary. "Brothers and sisters," she called, When a man refuses to lower himself to anger, but instead calls us to rise higher. That's a lesson worth remembering. The crowd murmured amen. Respect doesn't bow to commands. It lives in how we carry ourselves. Reverend Tate's words brought her congregation to its feet. Some had never clapped inside that sanctuary before, but now the applause rolled like thunder. In Sacramento, middle schoolers turned another phrase, "Stand up with me," into a banner stretched across their cafeteria wall. Their principal, stunned, admitted to a reporter they weren't even alive when Obama was first elected, but they get it. Photos of the banner raced online, praised as proof the moment was already shaping a generation. Even workplaces paused. In a St. Louis hospital, a supervisor opened a staff meeting with Obama's words, "Fighting for people who don't look like you." That's leadership. Nurses and doctors nodded, some exchanging glances that carried more weight than discussion. For a breath, the chaos of the ward gave way to quiet reflection. In rural Kansas, a farmer told NPR, "I'm not much for politics." But when Obama said respect is earned, that hit home. Out here, you treat your neighbors right, or you won't have neighbors for long. His plain words spread across social media as a reminder the message was bigger than party lines. For the young, the clip wasn't just politics, it was content. On TikTok, teens spliced Obama's words into edits set against gospel choirs, rap beats, and lo-fi study mixes. A lesson in dignity had gone viral. One TikTok edit, a montage of student-athletes training over Obama's words. "Respect comes when you stand for something greater than yourself," surged past 10 million views in just 2 days. But the clearest proof of the moment's reach came not online, but at dinner tables. In Milwaukee, a mother recalled her 9-year-old son asking, "Why was the president so mean to Mr. Obama?" She admitted she struggled to explain the weight of the word boy without burdening him. "But then I showed him Obama's response," she said. "I told him that's what strength looks like. Calm, patient, firm." Not everyone agreed. Conservative talk radio hosts ridiculed the praise, insisting the media had inflated a minor slight. One host in Oklahoma sneered, "If rolling your eyes and giving a lecture is leadership, then every teacher in America is the next president." Yet even in their mockery, they revealed the truth. They couldn't stop talking about it either. The moment had become unavoidable. Teachers were quoting Obama in classrooms. Pastors were weaving his words into sermons. Parents were using it to teach dignity. Teenagers were remixing it into art. The story had outgrown politics. It had slipped into culture itself, sticking in places where Washington rarely reached. As the cultural wave grew stronger, the real lesson began to distill. This wasn't just about one forum or one clash. It was about defining what leadership should mean for generations to come. By the end of that week, the noise hadn't quieted. Clips still rolled on television. Hashtags still lit up screens. Commentators still dissected the moment like a turning point in history. But beyond the chatter, something deeper had settled. People weren't just replaying what Trump said or what Obama answered. They were wrestling with the meaning of it. In Springfield, Missouri, a teenage girl sat at her kitchen table, phone still glowing from the replay. "Dad, why didn't Obama yell back? If someone said that to you, wouldn't you be mad?" Her father paused. "Sure, I'd be mad. But that's why what he did was stronger. He showed you don't have to scream to win. Sometimes calm cuts deeper." His daughter nodded, the lesson sinking in. That same night in Los Angeles, community organizers opened their town hall not with policy, but with Obama's words. The most powerful thing a leader can say is not sit down. It's stand up with me. A woman rose from the back of the room. That's what we need in this neighborhood. Leaders who invite us in, not push us out. The applause shook the walls, uniting the group around something larger than ordinances and crime statistics. Meanwhile, in a Wisconsin library, a book club devolved into an impromptu debate. One retiree shook her head. "I don't agree with all of Obama's politics, but my goodness, he showed restraint. That's rare. That's worth remembering." The message had begun to crystallize. Leadership wasn't about volume or dominance. It was about dignity. "That's character," one woman in the library said. Across from her, another member sighed. Trump was elected because he fights. Some people like that toughness. A third voice cut in gently. But fighting isn't the same as leading. That's what Obama showed us. The conversation didn't end with agreement, but it ended with thoughtfulness. And in today's climate, that was rare enough to matter. By Friday, even schools that rarely touch politics were embracing the lesson. In a fifth-grade classroom in Phoenix, students were asked to write about what leadership meant to them. One essay, shared by the teacher online, read simply, "Leaders don't make people feel small. They make people feel tall." The post went viral, proof that even children had understood the heart of the moment. Meanwhile, Obama's silence after the forum became its own story. No interviews, no tweets, no counterpoints. He let his words stand alone. That restraint was as much a lesson as the reply itself. Trump, by contrast, doubled down. Interviews, tweets, statements, all brimming with defiance. His supporters rallied loudly, but even many admitted privately that the exchange had left a mark. Historians began to weigh in. Writing in The Atlantic, one noted, "Moments like these are less about immediate politics and more about the cultural memory they create." A decade from now, students will read about this clash not for what it did to Trump or Obama politically, but for what it revealed about America's struggle with respect and leadership. By then, the words had taken on a life of their own. They weren't about Obama anymore. They belonged to anyone who had ever been told to sit down, to be quiet, to accept disrespect. The choice to answer not with rage, but with dignity. That was the lesson America couldn't ignore. Leadership isn't about how loudly you command. It's about how deeply you're heard. It isn't about belittling others to look strong. Real leadership is restraint, patience, and lifting others without shouting them down. In that Phoenix hall, Obama reminded us of something timeless. Respect can't be demanded. It must be earned. This wasn't just about two men on a stage. It was about us, what kind of example we want for our children, and what kind of leaders we choose to follow. If there's one takeaway, let it be this: words matter. And when the world tells you to sit down, real strength is in inviting others to stand up with you. Thank you for watching. If this story spoke to you, subscribe for more stories that matter.